This was in 2015. I had taken a road trip to a forest a few hours from me. There was a hike up to an abandoned fire lookout that I was really excited to explore. I should mention it was technically illegal to go inside it or camp in it, as it wasn't kept up with and could be structurally unstable. I'd done some research online though, and most people said that it seemed okay, but the last post I could find about it was 3 years ago, so I really didn't know what I'd find when I got up there. Anyway, I found a small ditch on the side of the road that I could park in. Then I got out my backpack with 2 days worth of gear and started the hike. With trips like this, there aren't usually defined paths to get there, so I used a handheld satellite GPS that allowed me to make sure I was going the right way. But really, the whole time I was just cutting through unknown terrain in the woods. The hike from the road was about 4 to 5 hours. The further in I got, the more dense and rough the terrain got. I was really banking on the fire lookout to still be intact and good enough for me to camp out in. But I guess if not, then I was just going to have to find somewhere else nearby to set up my tent and sleep at. After the pretty tiring several hours of hiking through the woods, I finally got there. I could see the building peeking out above the trees, and when I got closer, it actually looked decently in shape. The paint was worn off, of course, but it seemed to be holding up well. I gave the support beams a few pushes, and they were really solid. So I tried my luck climbing up the ladder. It was metal and felt sturdy, but still creaked with every step up. When I got to the top, I was in awe for a moment at the views. I could see basically the entire forest. There were no buildings or roads or houses for miles in all directions. It was just the woods. After taking in the view, I went around the ledge and inside the lookouts. It was really small, not like one of those big ones that you see get turned into Airbnbs or whatever. This was just one room, maybe 150 square feet. It had a decaying bed in the corner and an old wooden desk in the other corner, with rotting windows spanning the entire wall. There wasn't too much else to look at in there, so I put my bag down and rolled out my mattress and sleeping bag, then heated up a meal on my mini camping stove. Once the sun was setting, I walked out to the ledge and watched it. It was by far one of the best views I'd ever seen. I felt like it went by quick though, and then there was just darkness. It was cloudy out too, so no moonlight or stars were lighting up the sky. With nothing else to do though, I stayed sitting out on the ledge for a while. It was probably an hour into the night when I saw something below me. There was a light moving around in the trees. What was strange about it, though, was it wasn't like an artificial light. It had this orangish hue and was kind of flickering, kind of like a campfire would, which led me to believe it was a torch. It was moving between the trees in the forest, not too far from where I was. The chances of someone else being out here at the same time as me in such a remote part of the woods were really slim, given there wasn't even a trail to get here. Also, traveling around at night without a normal flashlight and using a torch was pretty odd. I watched as the light moved under the trees for a while, then it went behind something where I could no longer see it. For the next 30 minutes, I never saw it appear again. I still stayed out on the ledge though, taking in the calmness and quietness of the night. Eventually, the wind started to make it a bit cold, so I stood up to take in one last view before heading inside. When I looked below the ledge, though, someone was there. They were standing at the bottom in the grassy area between the fire lookout in the woods. It looked like they were looking directly up at me. Maybe it was the person with the light I saw earlier. "Hello?" I called out. I didn't know what else to say. They didn't move or say anything back to me. It was just this strange 10 or 15 seconds of looking at each other before they lifted up their hand, like in an acknowledging way or apologizing. Then they turned around and walked into the woods, still with no light on. Obviously, that was incredibly creepy and eerie, but for some reason in the moment, I felt so sure that it was just another hiker wanting to stay on the lookout and was probably just looking up, trying to see if anyone was in sight already. Why he hesitated to respond and only lifted his hand up, I don't know. I stayed outside for a little longer, but not seeing anything else, I went inside and got my sleeping bag to warm up. It was a little bit hard to fall asleep because of the wind hitting the windows and the wooden beams creaking under me, but eventually I did manage to pass out. It's hard to really know how much time passed, but when I woke up, the wind had settled down and it was still very dark outside. I opened my eyes, wondering why I was suddenly awake, but then I heard a familiar sound. The soft metal creak of the ladder outside. I sat up, thinking I must be mistaken, but then I heard it again and again. Someone was climbing up the ladder. I couldn't tell how far up or down they were. I could just hear the hinges at the top of the ladder creak with every step up they took. Outside the windows, though, it was completely dark. I unzipped my sleeping bag and got up, heart racing as I grabbed my backpack and walked onto the ledge. During the 20 or so seconds that it took to get up, the creaking got louder and faster, like they were hurrying, before it suddenly stopped just as I made it out to the ledge. I stood in place for a moment, waiting for another sound. Then I slowly walked around the walkway and peered around the corner at the opening to the ladder. No one was there. I carefully walked closer and felt my heart rate increasing as I leaned over and looked down. Nobody was on the ladder. I was just in shock for a second, confused and scared and unsure what the hell was going on. Then a sudden sequence of footsteps came rushing around the wooden walkway behind me. I only caught a glimpse of their dark figure running between the windows on the other side. I didn't hesitate to lower myself onto the ladder and hurry down. It was terrifying, trying to climb down the slippery metal ladder as my whole body was shaking from the adrenaline rush, with someone chasing right above me. I got halfway down before I saw their head peer out from above. I didn't stop until I got to the bottom and into the woods. Honestly, I don't know why I even grabbed my backpack when I got up to see what was going on. But it was the best decision I ever made, maybe even saved my life. With my flashlight and GPS on me, I was able to hike my way out of there and back to my car. As far as I know, I wasn't followed. I drove away and never looked back. I was camping at a small lake for the weekend. Really, this wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a few days in the woods by the water to relax and nothing more. The first day was exactly that. I got there, set up camp, and chilled for the whole day and night. This was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It had a thin footpath leading to it, but it wasn't marked on any maps online or anything, so only locals would probably know about it. My dad used to take me here when I was a kid. In all my years going out to that spot, both as a kid with my dad and as an adult by myself, never once was anyone else here. Honestly, there was never even any signs of anyone else ever having been there. Anyway, on my second day, I spent my time walking around the water and I guess just thinking to myself, I must have circled the lake 3 or 4 times. During those hours of walking, everything was quiet and nice. But then, on one of my laps around the lake, I happened to spot some footprints in the dirt, just on the edge of the tree line. I had been walking the same circle over and over, and never saw them before. Where they were, it was so clear and obvious, I don't think I would have missed them. They also looked pretty new, and what was really strange was not only that the footprints meant somebody else was out here, but that they were literal footprints, like barefoot, not shoe prints. The part of the lake I was at didn't even have any easy access to the water, so it's not like they took their boots off before going for a swim, not to mention I would have seen them in the lake. Seeing this really creeped me out for some reason. Why didn't I see them nearby while I was walking around? Were they watching me and didn't want me to see them? It was hard not to get paranoid about it. From what I was able to see, it looked like the footprints went up to the tree line looking out at the lake, then right back into the woods, where it seemed to go straight back for a while. I didn't want to follow them into that unknown territory of the forest, so I just walked back to my campsite. I kept looking out to the lake, or I guess the tree line around the lake, seeing if anyone was out there. I never saw anyone. As the sun started to come down, the paranoia started to build up again. Something about the footprints just felt off, and knowing that they were likely still nearby, it wasn't a comforting feeling. When it got darker, I fueled up my campfire with a good supply of wood and sat around it. I did whatever I could to keep my mind off of it, but it was pretty difficult. Part of me felt justified in feeling uneasy, and another part of me felt like I was overreacting for no reason. But not too far into the night, I heard footsteps approaching from the trees. I instantly turned and faced the darkness they were coming from. There were more than one. It sounded like two people slowly walking closer to my campsite. I stared in their direction until they suddenly came into the light. It was a man and a woman walking next to each other and stopping just at the edge of where the light from the fire could reach. I couldn't see much of their faces, or really anything more than their basic shape. I couldn't even tell how old or young they were. "Can I help you?" As soon as I said that, the woman turned and sprinted back into the woods, completely disappearing. But the man stayed where he was. He didn't move or even look back at the woman. It was about then that I looked down and realized he wasn't wearing any shoes. These were definitely the ones who were out by the lake. I asked again if I could help him, but then he too turned around and quietly walked back into the woods. I pretty much had an internal freakout after that. That was the most unsettling and strange encounter I'd ever had, almost not even feeling real. I didn't want to be in those woods for another second. I immediately started to pack my things. I'm not the kind of person to stick around when things get sketchy. Thankfully, my setup was easy to put up and take down, so I had everything tied down in my bag and ready to go within a few minutes. I didn't know where they went, but I didn't want to still be here if they came back. I kicked out all the unlit logs from the fire, so it would burn out soon after I left. Then I hurried into the woods. The walk was nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was really on edge, unsure if I was being followed, but the further away I got, the better I felt. It was about 40 minutes into the walk. The whole woods was silent, not even any crickets or anything, when I suddenly heard running footsteps nearby. It was in the distance, maybe 100 feet from me, and it was definitely a person. I couldn't see anything though, so I had to just keep walking. Only a few minutes later, I heard it again, this time on the other side of me. The footsteps seemed quieter than they should have been, too, which led me to believe that they were running barefoot, and that it was the same two I'd seen at the lake. If they'd been stalking me this far into the woods, who knows what they were trying to do. For a while, I'd keep hearing running footsteps in the distance, just short bursts, like they were quietly stalking me and then suddenly sprinting away. I can't think of anything that would have been more terrifying than that walk through the woods. Somehow, though, I made it back to my truck. I was able to make it out of there. I wish I had more to say, or that I figured out who that man and woman were, or what they were doing out there. But I have nothing. Maybe I'm insane, but sometimes I wonder if they were even alive or not. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. I never went back. I'm a 24-year-old female from northern Arizona. This was a couple years ago. At the time, I was living out of a small camper van, traveling along the West Coast. There is a lot of different lifestyles. People like to live in these types of vans, or RVs. I always tried to keep out of the big cities and stick to small towns for camping in between destinations, but for the most part, I liked to camp out in the back country. Being in the middle of the woods with nobody else around was where I found myself most comfortable and where I most enjoyed the lifestyle of traveling. I think part of it is that it was always safer to be out by yourself in the forest than it was to be stealth camping in a busy parking lot in the middle of a city. Don't get me wrong, it could still get creepy at night, but I always know I'm better off out there with nobody around. This week, I was slowly traveling between two big cities in Washington. I was taking my time, staying on the back roads and hunkering down at campsites for several days at a time. On this day, I pulled off the road and onto a small dirt trail going deep into the forest. There were a few pull-off spots, but none were taken, and it looked like nobody had been down here in a while. So I kept going, hoping to secure a larger and more scenic spot. At the end, there was a large circle to pull off on. It wasn't scenic, just surrounded by trees, but it was large and secluded and peaceful, and even had a stone circle in the middle for a campfire. I leveled out my van and parked. Since it was the middle of spring, it was raining pretty much every day here in Washington, so there wasn't much for me to do outside. I opened the side door to my van for some fresh air while I cooked a meal on my propane stove. It was around sunset, so I still had several hours before I'd be in bed. Over the next 30 minutes, the sun fell past the horizon, and the rain started picking up. I shut the door to keep the water out, and instead cracked open one of the small windows near the back of the van. I sat on the bed and watched a show on my laptop, but midway through it, a glare came in from the open window behind me. It was a light reflecting onto the screen of my laptop. Before I was able to react, it went away. It didn't move away, though. It turned off, as if someone switched the light off. When I turned around and looked out the window, I saw nothing. It was really dark and still pouring down outside. I had no way to know how far the light came from or what it even was. Being on a trail with other pull-off spots, I had to assume it was just another camper, maybe their headlights that somehow found its way through the trees and shined into my window. Then they quickly turned their vehicle off. The only problem with that was the light didn't come from the road I came down. Behind my window was just trees. Maybe there was another trail I didn't know about. There wasn't much investigating I could do anyway, so I turned back around and went back on my laptop. Occasionally, I'd check out the windows or think I'd heard something outside, but with the rain clinking against the metal roof, it wasn't clear if I was actually hearing something or not. Every time I looked, though, I never saw anything to confirm that something was out there, so I didn't worry myself too much. I want to say it was about 10 or 11 when I decided to call it in for the night and try to sleep. I turned off everything in the van, closed all the windows, and drew the shades. It was nearly pitch black inside. I got under the covers and tried to sleep. Usually, I didn't have much trouble at all, but tonight I just couldn't manage to fall asleep. Unfortunately, the rain picked up even more after an hour, and thunder started rolling in. It was very loud and made it impossible to even try to sleep. About 2 hours into the night, and through all the harsh rain and thunder, I swear I heard something move outside. It was just loud enough for me to know I really heard something. It sounded like someone or something running and kicking over a branch on the ground, somewhere just outside of my van. As soon as I heard it, there were no other sounds. It was so dark, I couldn't even see the ground beneath the window. The longer I looked out there, the more uneasy I felt. I just had this feeling like someone else was looking back at me. I put the window cover back down. I sat there and tried to tell myself I was overreacting. But only a minute later, I heard a voice. It was a male voice, kind of in a loud whisper, like they were talking to someone else. I sat in silence, too scared to open the covers and look out the windows again, knowing they'd probably see me if they hadn't already. However, they likely already could assume someone was in the van, which makes it all the more terrifying. There was a good 2 or 3 minutes where I didn't hear anything aside from the rain and thunder before there was suddenly something outside the sliding side door to the van. It sounded like bending plastic, like someone was leaning against the side door. Then there was a knock. A few seconds later, they knocked again. Even though I was sure they knew I was in here already, I still was too scared to speak. Maybe they weren't sure how many people were inside, or if I was a man or woman, so I felt safer not giving them anything and just staying quiet. A very disturbing and anxious 5 minutes went by as the knocking continued every few seconds without anyone saying anything. They had to be drenched by now and probably couldn't see at all through this weather. But then they finally said something. "Sheriff's Department, open up." What? I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why wouldn't they have said that from the beginning? They continued knocking and calling out different lines, all basically stating that they were an officer and I needed to open the door. This seemed like a desperate attempt to get me to open up without violence. I slowly lifted the window cover and looked out. All I could see was a dark figure moving near the door, but from the shape of it, it didn't look like he had any sort of law enforcement gear on, so I was sure this was about to get really bad. I debated in my head what to do for 30 seconds, as it felt like the knocking got more and more impatient before I decided to risk getting into the driver's seat and trying to drive away. As soon as I went up there and turned the car on, I heard 2 sets of footsteps running up to the side of the van. I began pulling out just as a figure appeared in the window next to me. Thank God the van didn't get stuck and I was able to get out onto the trail. As I drove away, I never saw any other vehicle down the road, which makes the intentions of these unknown people likely really disturbing. I put in a report with the county, who of course said no officers were out there that night, but I never got any follow-up. Things could have gotten really bad out there, but I haven't had anything else happen since then. I was staying at my friend's place for the weekend. She was away on a trip with her family, but she had a small cat that was afraid of thunderstorms, and this weekend we were supposed to get a really bad storm. Her cat was very independent though, usually just sitting alone in whichever room she felt like. It started storming the day before my friend left, and it continued throughout the whole weekend. This was on Saturday. I had spent the night there with no issues at all. Her cat, Molly, did fine with the storm. That morning, I enjoyed relaxing on her comfy couch and reading. I always loved staying at my friend's place because it was out in the woods. It felt so isolated and peaceful. Midway through the day, though, a call came in on the home phone. This was back when those were a common thing. I checked in case it was her trying to reach me, but it said unknown number, so I didn't answer. But a few minutes later, a call came through again. It said the same thing, unknown number. It rang out, but this time a voice came through on the answering machine. It was a quiet, male voice. They just said one word, my friend's name, as if asking if she could hear him. He then hung up after a couple seconds of silence. I didn't know if this was someone she was talking to, or like a family member or something, so I just texted her to let her know that someone called the home phone. I did find it strange that it came up as an unknown caller, though. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more calls came in from that same number, but no more voice messages. My friend never responded either. I guess they were pretty busy. I didn't worry myself about it, though. I figured it was nothing. I made food and really spent the rest of the day not doing much of anything. Later, say around 8 or 9, I found a movie to watch upstairs in the bedroom. I got about halfway through it before remembering to check on Molly and make sure she had food and water. I went downstairs, but was confused to see her standing right at the front door, staring at the crack in the doorway, like she was waiting for it to open. I called her name, and she looked at me, but only for a moment before looking back at the door. It kind of creeped me out, if I'm being honest. I walked up to the door and hesitantly looked out the peephole at the porch. The glass had fogged up from all the rain, so everything was blurry and I couldn't really make out anything. But then something moved, enough for me to tell there was something, or someone, standing on the other side of the porch. I felt a little unsettled, but I continued to watch, trying to get a clearer view of what I was seeing. I really wanted to know for sure if there was someone out there, but I also didn't want to open the door if there was someone there. 2 to 3 minutes went by without any changes in what I could see. I thought I was just scaring myself for no reason. After all, if someone was out there, they would have knocked on the door by now. I left the door to go check on Molly's food and water and grab myself some snacks for the movie. When I passed by the door again, Molly wasn't there anymore. I looked out just to double check, and something looked different. It was still fogged up and blurry, but one of the shapes I saw wasn't there anymore, like it just disappeared. Was there really someone standing there the whole time? Feeling off about everything, I picked Molly up and brought her to the bedroom with me. I turned the movie back on and sat on the bed. The whole time the movie was playing, I couldn't shake a really unsettling feeling I had. 30 minutes went by, when suddenly Molly jumped off the bed and walked up to the bedroom door. She didn't scratch at it or look back at me like she wanted to go out. She just stared at the crack in the doorway, exactly the same as she did at the front door, like someone was out there. My heart immediately started racing. I called her name in a shaky voice, but her focus was locked on the door. I got up from the bed and quietly walked over, then leaned my ear against the door. I couldn't hear anything. I then crouched down and peered under the crack between the floor. My whole body aggressively shot back. There was someone standing right outside the door, just a couple inches away. My eyes immediately looked at the doorknob. I had never even locked it. I snapped the lock down, and almost right away, the person on the other side ran away from the door. They went downstairs, where I could no longer hear anything. I called 911, then called my friend. By the time cops got there, the house was empty and nobody was around. With all the information, it seemed that the intruder was likely a stalker, probably the same one who kept calling. So they tried to trace the phone number, but had no luck. It was pretty much left at that. I feel bad for my friend, because whoever that man was, he was definitely stalking her and not me. I don't know if it was just a coincidence that they showed up during the weekend she was gone, or if they were trying to break into what they thought would be an empty home. After all, I never answered the phone, so they probably were confident the house was empty. Maybe they were planning to wait and catch her off guard when she eventually got back from vacation. We never found out who they were or what they were doing. This was in mid-November of last year. I had just gotten laid off due to budget cutting at the office. Luckily, I had some money saved up to cover for me while I searched for a new job. For several weeks, I was stuck at home, just looking through lists of job openings on my laptop. After the first 2 weeks, though, I started to get a bit impatient. I applied to pretty much every position I was interested in, and I hadn't gotten a single response. I ended up trying to look on different websites from the usual ones. One of them I had a bit more luck on, finding a few new ones to apply to, and later in the day I finally got an email from one of them. The manager introduced himself as Zach, and in the email he said his schedule was pretty packed, but he wanted to get an interview with me that night if possible. I wasn't fully prepared, nor did I feel comfortable enough to ask why it had to be tonight, but I definitely didn't want to let this slip by without trying. I thought showing up on short notice would be a good way to show my commitment. The job was just some regular sales job from the looks of it, but the pay was worth it. I agreed to the interview, and Zach sent me the address and said to be there at 7:30. I got ready and headed over, arriving 15 minutes early. I didn't have any time to research the place or anything, so I wasn't all too sure what to expect. The place it had me pull into was the parking lot of a small building. It wasn't obvious from the outside what the building was for. It only had an address number on it. I mean, I assumed it was just an office because it was a sales job, but it was hard to say because all the lights were off. The parking lot was also empty. Something felt wrong. I checked the address again and looked it up, and it came back to the same spot. The building had no name on Google either. I called the phone number attached to the email that Zach sent me. He didn't pick up. I called a couple more times and still got no answer. I waited until 15 minutes past the scheduled time, then decided to leave. Dark, empty building with nobody in the parking lot and getting no reply from the interviewer. The whole thing felt sketchy, and in hindsight, I should have been more aware to the possibility. I drove home. I was upset about the waste of time, but overall, I just wanted to move past it. I told myself I'd stick with the regular job search websites and would continue the search in the morning. I wasn't sure if Zach gave me the wrong address on accident or what really happened, but I didn't waste more of my time thinking about it. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the couch, cracking it open and turning on the TV. With no job, I had no bedtime, so I pretty much just chilled on the couch until I felt sleepy. Throughout the hours, though, I kept hearing something upstairs, just like a creak in the ceiling. I checked out the window a couple of times to see if it was windy outside, but it wasn't at all. The creaking didn't concern me really. It didn't sound abnormal by any means. I think I got tired around 10 p.m. I shut off the TV and the downstairs lights, then walked upstairs to the bedroom. The last thing I remember was getting in bed and laying down, falling asleep really quickly, before suddenly I was awake again. My eyes were opened to the pitch black room. As I laid there, I heard that same creak sound that I'd been hearing. It was close to me, like somewhere on the other side of the room. I looked over with my tired eyes, barely seeing anything in the dark. But then there was the slow and quiet sound that I recognized as the closet sliding open. My eyes opened a little more, seeing just the outline of the closet door slowly opening. I felt almost like I was frozen, just stuck in place, unable to move as I watched this happen. My mind wasn't fully convinced this was even real. It wasn't until the closet stopped moving and a figure leaned out from behind it that my body jerked out of the frozen state I was in. I grabbed my phone and jumped out of bed, opposite to the side the closet was on. The figure didn't move though. They just stood still and stared at me, almost like they were hoping I somehow didn't see them. Standing up though, and with my eyes adjusted, I was 100% sure what I was seeing was real. I ran out of the room and left my house as I spoke to a 911 operator. It was probably dumb of me, but I stood in my front yard and watched through my front door at the staircase. I didn't want whoever was in there to leave without getting caught. Obviously, they could have been dangerous and armed, so it wasn't the smartest decision. A few minutes later, 2 cops showed up. I never saw anyone come down the stairs, so I told them where I last saw the guy. They went in and found him still hiding in the closet. When they pulled him out and dragged him into the car, I couldn't believe how disturbing this guy looked. Oily, long and messy hair, disgusting clothes, and these wide, unfriendly eyes. He didn't say a single word as to what he was doing, but it only took a couple days to get the whole story. He had made these fake job listings on multiple sites. There were actually hundreds of fake listings he made, all for different types of jobs. Disturbingly, he had all my info from the resume I sent in, and he knew exactly when I'd leave my house for the interview, so he broke in while I was gone. That whole night, he was in my home with me, and just a couple feet away while I was sleeping. However, we still never got an answer as to what he was planning to do. Without him outright saying it, there's no way for me to ever know what was going to happen that night. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, barren farmland for miles in all directions. There's a main highway that's not too far from me, but that's about the only paved road around here. Everything else is dirt, or if you're lucky, gravel. Nearest town is 20 minutes away, and it isn't really much of a town. Anyway, I'm 44 and retired, so I spend most of my days at home. This was a regular, ordinary day for me. It was raining, which it had been for the last week, and I was inside going about my routine. Around noon, I decided to head out to my front porch to have a smoke and enjoy the falling rain. I don't know how long I sat out there for, probably an hour, when I noticed someone coming down the far dirt road that led up to my house. Again, it was flat land, so I could see pretty far, although the rain made it a bit more difficult. This person was on a bike though, like an ADV motorcycle or dirt bike, riding through the rain. I thought it was odd, but assumed they just mistook my driveway for being a dirt path. They kept coming down it though, until they were getting really close to my house. They basically got right up to where my garage was, before stopping. The man looked older, but was wearing a full-face helmet. Then he was sitting on the driveway, looking at my house until he noticed me. He watched me for a moment, then turned around and rode back the way he came. That was probably one of the strangest encounters I'd ever had on my property. Nobody ever comes down here, because they shouldn't. I had to assume it was just a mistake. I stayed out for a while longer. Then the rain and wind started picking up, so I went back inside. I had almost entirely forgotten about the unforeseen visit earlier. I made another cup of coffee and relaxed inside. I was on a call with my brother for a while and took a nap as well. The day was chill, no errands to run or things to do around the house. The rain made a pretty sudden change around 8 p.m. though. There was thunder and lightning and heavy downpour that thumped relentlessly against the old roof. But somehow through it, I heard the slightest sound of a heavy engine outside. It had that same dirt bike sound that was identical to the one that came by earlier in the day. I went up to my front window, seeing a headlight carving its way through the fog and rain. In the moment, I didn't even think about how crazy it was to be out riding at night in this awful weather, because all I could think about was why had they come back? As they got closer, they shut off their headlight, and instantly they disappeared. I couldn't see them at all. I waited, but they never came up to the garage like they did last time. Minutes went by without me seeing or hearing anything. Where could they have gone? Unfortunately, situations like these can't easily be called into the police station, so I was on my own. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom, which I only kept for self-defense. I had no idea what was going on, if they were lost or needed help, or if they were dangerous. All I knew was that I was alone in the middle of nowhere and needed to be extra cautious. I spent the next 20 minutes routinely checking out the windows on all sides of my property. I saw nothing more until I made another rounds, and when I looked out the back window, I just made out something in the fog. It quickly moved away. The eerie nature of it sent chills through me. Being unable to see anything and having no real way to know what was going on made it as unnerving as it could possibly be. Then I started hearing muddy footsteps outside my house, like right up against the house, splashing in the mud and water. Every time I tried to get a look out the window, they'd move out of the way. I really didn't know what to do here. I felt if I let this go on for too long, things could get even more unpredictable and possibly messy. Clearly, their intentions were not harmless. I went into the garage and got in my truck, then quickly opened the garage door, pulled out, and closed it. My body was shaking the whole time, praying this didn't escalate. I moved the truck further out front and spun around to face the house. Finally, I turned on the high beams and the bar lights on the front. It immediately lit up my entire house, and standing right outside of one of the windows was a man. He was in full black clothing and holding a hammer in his right hand. It looked like he was trying to look into the window and maybe didn't even hear me pull out of the garage under the thunder and rain. The man sprinted off behind the house. I saw him get on his bike, which was laying in the grass far off from the house. He rode off into the dark. I stayed up that entire night. The next day, I went into town and notified the sheriff's office of the encounter. I don't know who that was, but seeing the hammer in his hand, it seems clear he was trying to break inside and probably had malicious intent. Luckily, I didn't have to find out the hard way. It was mid-December. I was only 17 at the time, and every year just before Christmas week, my mom had to go on a 3-day business trip for work. Being an only child that lived just with my mom, I'd spend these days that she was gone home alone. Usually she'd leave just before winter break, so I'd be in school for most of the day. But this year she left the same day that our school let out for the holidays. I had the house to myself and wanted nothing more than to stay inside and chill all day. Our city was going through somewhat of a snowstorm, so I couldn't really leave the house anyway. I made some of the food that was left for me and found a new movie to watch. I had to pause it several times throughout the couple hours though, because the wind and snow would suddenly pick up and get really loud. It seemed like every time I looked outside, the weather was worse. Then, around 7 or 8, someone was walking up to the front door. I could hear their footsteps kicking against the snow, and they coughed several times as they slowly made their way up to the porch. I didn't have a clue who it could be. I paused everything and looked at the door, waiting for them to knock or ring the doorbell. As more time passed, though, I could feel myself getting nervous, as something didn't feel right. I want to say I waited 3 or 4 minutes, not hearing anything, before I went up to the door and looked outside. Nobody was there. I could see the footsteps coming right up to the door, then going back the way they came. I was really confused how clearly I heard them walk up, but somehow I didn't hear them leave. Also, with the snowstorm outside, what reason could someone have to come up to my house? I think the only reason I could settle on was that the snow made it difficult to see, and they mistook my house for theirs. Maybe they realized once they got up to the porch and didn't want to alarm anyone, so they quietly left. It's probably a bit of a stretch, but I guess it was possible. After a while, I'd mostly stopped thinking about the situation and was more caught up worrying about the storm. The power cut out a few times, lasting for several minutes before it came back on. Because of that, I couldn't really watch TV or anything, so I just sat on the couch and scrolled on my phone. It was maybe around 11 when, through the harsh wind, I heard a thump against the house. I initially ignored it, but only a few moments later, the power cut out again. Thinking the thump might have caused it, I got up. It sounded like it was from the side near the kitchen, so I turned my phone light on, then walked over and looked around. I thought it was probably just a coincidence that the power shut off right after I heard the thump, but I just wanted to be sure nothing happened. I didn't see anything, and I started to walk away. "Hey!" I jumped and looked at the back door, seeing a man standing against the other side. The back porch light wasn't on, so he was mostly covered by the dark. I could only see his face peering in at me. "Hey, kid, would you get the door for me? It's freezing out here," he said, putting his hand on the door and trying to open it. My head wasn't fully grasping the situation yet, and I kind of just stood there and stared at him. "Kid, get the door, please." Something gave me a bad feeling. I knew better than to trust this guy, even though it was a blizzard outside. The man started coughing, and I started to back up, and the man's face instantly fell into a disturbing frown. "Open the f***ing door," he yelled, banging his fist against it several times. I ran back to the couch and got my phone. I then stood in the hallway and watched the man as I dialed 911. My phone was struggling to hold service and kept dropping the call, but after a few tries, I was able to get through long enough to ask for help. The man at the door continued to yell at me and hit the door, but eventually ran off. I'm assuming the snowstorm caused some trouble for the police, as they didn't make it until nearly 30 minutes after. I told them what I could, and I called my mom to let her know what happened. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been stalking me and trying to guilt me into letting him in, or he could have actually been in need of help, although it's unlikely. I never saw him again after that night, though. I visited my family for the holidays and was driving back home. The trip in total was about 10 hours, which I split into 2 drives on the way up. But on the way back, I decided to power through it in one long drive. Around the halfway point, snow started coming down. It wasn't too much, so I wasn't worried about it. However, it got worse as I kept driving. Once I was 3 hours away from home, it was pouring down pretty heavily, and with the sun going down as well, it definitely was not ideal. There were almost no other cars out though, which is the only reason I decided to keep driving. The snow made it harder, but I was still on track to be home by the end of the night. It was just after the sun had fully set, and about 30 minutes out from the nearest town I just passed through, that I noticed a car on the road ahead of me. Their headlights were the only light on the road, in the middle of the blanket of snow covering everything else. And as I got closer, it was clear that they were stuck, or at least not moving. Their car was sideways on the road, with their hazard lights flickering, and a man was standing out in the cold next to it. Obviously, with the snow and cold, I really didn't want to stop, but it seemed I didn't have a choice. His car was blocking most of the road off that was paved. I parked just behind him. The man immediately started waving at me and walked up to my window. My car slid and got stuck there. "Can you help me push it out?" He spoke slowly, like his English wasn't the best, but hoping I could get back on the road as soon as possible, I agreed to help him. The car didn't really look like it was in too much snow, so maybe just a little push might actually be enough. I threw my hat and gloves on, then got out. The wind hitting my face and snow instantly soaking me made me wonder why the guy even got out of his car and didn't just call for help. My face and hands were already getting numb, so I hurried to the back of his car and waited for him to get his gloves. It was too dark to see anything through the windows, and after a little bit of standing back there waiting, I looked around to see what was taking him so long. He was still leaning into the front seat, as if looking for his gloves, but I thought I heard him talking. A second later, he came back out and looked at me. Were you talking to me?" I asked. He looked concerned, but said he was just talking to himself. He smiled, then walked around to the back to help me push. I couldn't help but feel like something had changed, though. His whole demeanor and the situation just felt different. Although I didn't hear what he said, it didn't really sound like he was talking to himself. But if someone else was in the car, then why was he out here alone and asking for my help? All these thoughts came rushing through my head, and I guess for a few seconds I was kind of spaced out. So much so that I didn't notice the man staring at me. His smile had dropped, and he had an eerie look in his eyes, like they were hollow and lifeless, completely opposite of what he looked like before. I didn't even hesitate, beginning to hurry back to my car. Just then, several doors from the car I was just behind opened, and 3 more men got out, rushing toward me. I sprinted into my driver's seat, and thank goodness I left my car on, because I put it straight in drive and rolled past them, almost hitting one on the way out. I was terrified of possibly getting stuck in the snowbank, as the path around their car was very thin, but thankfully I made it around and was able to get away. I put in a report with the police at the closest town, but there were never any updates as far as I know. I'm assuming the men weren't really stuck and probably left right after I did. I don't know what those men were up to. Of course, I had my guesses, but if I had stayed and didn't leave right when I did, who knows where I'd be. This was last year. It was late November, and this was the first snowfall of the season. It wasn't supposed to be anything too much, just a couple inches of snow. I got home from work around 8, and by then the snow had already started. I heated up some leftover pizza and stayed downstairs for a couple hours. Around 10, I went upstairs to my bedroom, sitting at my desk with my laptop. Before I could even open up something to watch, I heard something right above me. It sounded like a thud in the ceiling. I thought it was likely the snow weighing down on the roof and was probably nothing to be concerned about. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned at all, though. This was my first winter at this house, and it wasn't in the best shape, so part of me was a little worried about any possible leaks or other problems that could happen with the snow. I tried to not think about it too much and continued looking for something to watch, but then it happened again. A thud resonating through the ceiling. I looked up, and the thuds continued, sounding almost in a straight line across the ceiling. I was genuinely worried now. I got up and grabbed my winter jacket, then hurried out the front door and looked up at the roof. Unexpectedly, the side of the roof that my bedroom was under, there was no snow on it. It had all slid off and fell into a pile in front of the house. I looked at the other side of the roof, and the snow was still there. I then looked at my neighbors' homes, and all of them still had snow sitting on their roofs, like normal. The way the snow had fallen off just one side of my roof didn't seem natural, like something was either wrong with my roof or something else had made this happen. Probably whatever those thuds were that I was hearing. With no more answers to find outside, and my whole body starting to shiver from the cold, I walked back to the front door. I opened it and hurried inside, stomping my boots on the doormat. When I looked up, though, my heart almost stopped. There were puddles of water going across the hallway. I stayed still and looked around, seeing water going through the living room and even up the stairs next to me. It only took me a second to see a boot print in one of the puddles, and I immediately turned right back around and headed out the door. I stood by the road and called the police, shivering as I tried to tell them my situation. About 30 seconds into the call, I saw something move past one of the windows in my bedroom, and moments later, a figure stood behind the glass, looking down at me. They only stayed for a second, then backed away. I didn't see anything else the rest of the time that I waited for the police. As I was waiting, though, I put together most of the pieces in my mind. Someone had made it up on the roof, making the snow fall as they walked across. There were several windows they could have gotten in from that I honestly had no idea if they were locked or not. When police arrived, they didn't find the intruder inside anymore, but they basically confirmed my theory. There were multiple trees going over top my house that anyone could easily climb, and with the windows being accessible, it made for an easy target. At least, the officers think that that's the reason they broke in, just because I was an easy target. Nothing was missing though, and the way the shoe prints went through the whole house felt eerily like them looking for me. What's crazy is that I must have gone outside to check on the roof at the exact time they got in through the window. If I was any later, I would have been face to face with them, or if I'd gone back inside sooner, they might have not left tracks through the house yet for me to immediately notice. It's been nearly an entire year since this, and so far nothing else has happened. Maybe it was just a one-time attempt, but I don't think I'll ever feel safe with all the uncertainties of what happened that night. I live in the middle of nowhere. It's flat, barren farmland for miles in all directions. There's a main highway that's not too far from me, but that's about the only paved road around here. Everything else is dirt, or if you're lucky, gravel. Nearest town is 20 minutes away, and it isn't really much of a town. Anyway, I'm 44 and retired, so I spend most of my days at home. This was a regular, ordinary day for me. It was raining, which it had been for the last week, and I was inside going about my routine. Around noon, I decided to head out to my front porch to have a smoke and enjoy the falling rain. I don't know how long I sat out there for, probably an hour, when I noticed someone coming down the far dirt road that led up to my house. Again, it was flat land, so I could see pretty far, although the rain made it a bit more difficult. This person was on a bike though, like an ADV motorcycle or dirt bike, riding through the rain. I thought it was odd, but assumed they just mistook my driveway for being a dirt path. They kept coming down it though, until they were getting really close to my house. They basically got right up to where my garage was, before stopping. The man looked older, but was wearing a full-face helmet. Then he was sitting on the driveway, looking at my house until he noticed me. He watched me for a moment, then turned around and rode back the way he came. That was probably one of the strangest encounters I'd ever had on my property. Nobody ever comes down here, because they shouldn't. I had to assume it was just a mistake. I stayed out for a while longer, then the rain and wind started picking up, so I went back inside. I had almost entirely forgotten about the unforeseen visit earlier. I made another cup of coffee and relaxed inside. I was on a call with my brother for a while and took a nap as well. The day was chill, no errands to run or things to do around the house. The rain made a pretty sudden change around 8 p.m. though. There was thunder and lightning and heavy downpour that thumped relentlessly against the old roof. But somehow through it, I heard the slightest sound of a heavy engine outside. It had that same dirt bike sound that was identical to the one that came by earlier in the day. I went up to my front window, seeing a headlight carving its way through the fog and rain. In the moment, I didn't even think about how crazy it was to be out riding at night in this awful weather, because all I could think about was why had they come back? As they got closer, they shut off their headlight, and instantly they disappeared. I couldn't see them at all. I waited, but they never came up to the garage like they did last time. Minutes went by without me seeing or hearing anything. Where could they have gone? Unfortunately, situations like these can't easily be called into the police station, so I was on my own. I grabbed my shotgun from the bedroom, which I only kept for self-defense. I had no idea what was going on, if they were lost or needed help, or if they were dangerous. All I knew was that I was alone in the middle of nowhere and needed to be extra cautious. I spent the next 20 minutes routinely checking out the windows on all sides of my property. I saw nothing more until I made another rounds, and when I looked out the back window, I just made out something in the fog. It quickly moved away. The eerie nature of it sent chills through me. Being unable to see anything and having no real way to know what was going on made it as unnerving as it could possibly be. Then I started hearing muddy footsteps outside my house, like right up against the house, splashing in the mud and water. Every time I tried to get a look out the window, they'd move out of the way. I really didn't know what to do here. I felt if I let this go on for too long, things could get even more unpredictable and possibly messy. Clearly, their intentions were not harmless. I went into the garage and got in my truck, then quickly opened the garage door, pulled out, and closed it. My body was shaking the whole time, praying this didn't escalate. I moved the truck further out front and spun around to face the house. Finally, I turned on the high beams and the bar lights on the front. It immediately lit up my entire house, and standing right outside of one of the windows was a man. He was in full black clothing and holding a hammer in his right hand. It looked like he was trying to look into the window and maybe didn't even hear me pull out of the garage under the thunder and rain. The man sprinted off behind the house. I saw him get on his bike, which was laying in the grass far off from the house. He rode off into the dark. I stayed up that entire night. The next day, I went into town and notified the sheriff's office of the encounter. I don't know who that was, but seeing the hammer in his hand, it seems clear he was trying to break inside and probably had malicious intent. Luckily, I didn't have to find out the hard way.